This is Trump on Earth. I'm Julie Grant. As forest fires continue to blaze in the western states and Hurricane Sally makes landfall in Alabama, President Donald Trump caused controversy by questioning the science around climate change.
It'll start getting cooler. You just watch.
I wish science agreed with you.
Well, I don't think science knows, actually.
His words were in response to California Secretary for Natural Resources Wade Crowfoot, who said to the president, quote, "We want to work with you to really recognize the changing climate." Trump calls himself a great environmentalist, at the same time gutting environmental regulations and protections. The president often explains his actions by claiming regulations are job killers that hurt the economy.
Nearly 4 years ago, we ended this regulatory assault on the American worker, and we launched the most dramatic regulatory relief campaign in American history by far. No other administration has done anywhere near.
Many industry leaders and conservative groups support these moves, saying regulations create red tape and place unnecessary burdens on industry. But even with the rollbacks, traditional blue-collar jobs, like those in the coal industry, are being lost. And some labor unions actually see efforts to stem climate change as an important part of their future. Enter the Green-Blue Alliance, a coalition of labor unions and environmental organizations that pushes for green job growth. It was created in 2006 by a couple of odd bedfellows, the United Steelworkers Union and the Sierra Club. Jason Walsh is the executive director.
We agree, labor unions, environmental organizations agree on a heck of a lot more than we disagree. And we agree on the most important things.
And one of the most important things, says Walsh, is the presidential election. On this episode, we talk with Walsh about the Green-Blue Alliance and the election and how the future of the labor and environmental movements is tied together. So we're here with Jason Walsh, Executive Director of the BlueGreen Alliance. What is your mission? What are you trying to do?
We are first and foremost a policy advocacy organization, and we work at the federal level, but also in a number of states. And the issues we work on are pretty broad, including climate, energy, infrastructure, jobs, and worker health and safety policy. The foundational principle of our coalition, and I would call it our mission, is that Americans shouldn't have to choose between good jobs and a clean environment. Our partners believe that we can and must have both. And that's a principle that really guides all of our work. Since the start of COVID-19, we have been particularly focused on two areas of work. The first is just trying to meet workers' and families' immediate needs. And a lot of that has revolved around trying to keep workers safe on the job. And then we have been working on legislation that will stimulate our economy and bring people back to work when it's safe and hopefully create an economy that is cleaner and stronger and more resilient at the end of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, you referenced this already, but often it's the jobs and the environment, the economy and the environment have been pitted against each other. So do you think that view is still true? I think you've made that clear.
Let me acknowledge that there are tensions and conflicts, right, between labor unions and environmental organizations. We've certainly seen evidence of that at times, particularly around certain projects. But in my experience, obviously I have a bit of a bias here, but I think it's well-founded. We agree, labor unions and environmental organizations agree on a heck of a lot more than we disagree. And we agree on the most important things. And the most recent important thing that we agreed on was who we should endorse for president in the 2020 election cycle. We have never in the history of our organization, which is at this point, 14 years, endorsed a candidate for any public office. But our labor and environmental groups are united around an endorsement of Joe Biden for president. So that's a pretty important thing that we all agree on.
Yeah, so why at this time did you feel like it was important to step out and make an endorsement when you hadn't done that before?
Well, let's start with Donald Trump, who is the most anti-worker, anti-environment president in our lifetime. And we view his potential reelection as really an existential threat to the mission of the BlueGreen Alliance and everything that we fight for. I mentioned that we reject the notion that Americans have to choose between good jobs and a clean environment. That lie is something that President Trump peddles over and over again.
These radical plans would not make the world cleaner. They would just make and put Americans out of work, and they put them out of work rapidly.
We'll turn the EPA, environmental. We'll turn the EPA from a job killer into a job creator. You watch.
We also have in Joe Biden someone who has, for the entirety of his career, been a friend and an ally of the labor movement and the environmental movement.
I still know how to say the word union. U-N-I-O-N, union.
He has put forward plans that recognize that we are facing a climate crisis in this country.
Donald Trump's climate denial may not have caused these fires and record floods and record hurricanes. But if he gets a second term, these hellish events will continue to become more common, more devastating, and more deadly.
But we are also facing a crisis of economic and racial inequality, right? And that the solutions to both crises are linked. And he has put forward a set of proposals that first start with a recognition that good-paying jobs for the broadest range of Americans should be at the center of our climate solutions. And those are jobs in American manufacturing, in rebuilding our infrastructure, in building out a new clean energy system. These are the things that he is committed to do, and we are confident that he will fight for them.
You know, when Donald Trump thinks about climate change, he thinks hoax. When I think about it, I think jobs. Good paying union jobs that put Americans to work, building a stronger, more climate resilient nation.
You know, at the leadership, you're endorsing Joe Biden, and I think a number of labor unions have also endorsed Joe Biden and the Democratic ticket. But the membership of a lot of the unions seem to support President Trump's reelection. Why are we seeing this sort of disconnect between what the leadership is saying is best for workers and what workers are doing in terms of who they're supporting?
I think it's a fair question. I don't know if I have a complete answer. First, let's just acknowledge that the labor unions in particular that have endorsed Biden for president are democratic institutions that have elected officers that are accountable and answerable to their rank and file members. So that's, I think, an important point. Union households, like the rest of America, are pretty split over who they support. Although I think in more recent polling, you will find that union households disproportionately are going to support Biden for president. Your question, though, raises a whole set of issues around education and where voters get their information. The reality is that those of us who are trying to educate union households about Trump's true track record, which, as a start, has regularly gutted health and safety laws protecting workers on the job, not to mention making the air and water dirtier, which is a concern for households across the ideological spectrum. That record, frankly, is not known very well. And so to do, I think, a better job of getting the word out about what Trump stands for and how that is contrary very much to his record. So let's take coal miners as an example.
They have not been treated well, but they're going to be treated well now. Clean coal, right? Clean coal.
This is a guy who surrounded himself with coal miners as political props when he was running for president in 2016 and during his presidency.
There's another promise that is deeply important to me, and I know it is deeply important to you.
He promised to bring back the coal industry.
We are going to put our coal miners back to work.
At the start of his presidency, there were about 55,000 coal miners in this country still working. First half of 2020, there were 45,000 coal miners still working. So he has failed on that promise. At the same time, he has not done some of the basic things that are necessary to protect coal miners on the job. First and foremost, dealing with the fact that we have a resurgence of black lung disease in the coal mines, and that requires a strong role by the Mine Safety and Health Administration. And under this administration, they've done nothing.
Last year saw some of the leading Democrats in Washington propose the Green New Deal, addressing climate change and also seemingly taking workers' rights very seriously, calling for workforce training, collective bargaining, increasing those rights, retirement security, universal health care. But some of the unions, including the AFL-CIO, said they didn't like it. Why did we see someone like the AFL-CIO come out against the Green New Deal?
Well, let's be clear. The AFL-CIO did not come out against the Green New Deal. The Energy Committee of the AFL released a letter that took issue with a number of the provisions within the Green New Deal. I think the best way I can answer that question is by talking about a process we went through as a coalition, which produced an agenda for climate action that we call Solidarity for Climate Action. And this is an agenda that every one of our 7 labor partners and 6 environmental partners signed on to. It simultaneously calls for net zero carbon emissions by 2050 across the economy. It also calls for dealing with the crisis of income inequality in this country head on. And as a step toward addressing that, making damn sure that we do a better job of unionizing some of the new jobs that are emerging in renewable energy sectors. And to deal with the problem, you first have to acknowledge there's a problem. And we have a problem with the fact that very few of these new jobs in the clean economy are union, and that frankly is one of the factors that influence the reaction of some of the energy unions in response to the Green New Deal. So, if we're going to address concerns of labor unions, we got to do that in a real way. A lot of their members are employed in the existing energy economy. This is a bread and butter issue for their members. They've got rents to pay, mortgages to pay, kids to send to school. It's not abstract, right? And so in order to get their full-throated support of a clean energy economy, we've got to make those jobs better jobs and family-sustaining career jobs. The point I'm making about our Solidarity platform is that we had unions, starting with the steelworkers, right? Actually calling for a net zero economy, which is consistent with what the IPCC tells us we need to do to fend off the worst consequences of climate change. We had our environmental partners acknowledging that we've got to do a better job of making jobs in the clean economy better, that we've got to not only address this as a climate crisis, but as an economic crisis. And we were able to unify all of our partners around that set of proposals. Now, I think it's telling that we were able to get some of the very same unions that criticized the Green New Deal in support of a platform that has a lot of similarities with the Green New Deal. And I would suggest that a lot of this is just based on time and relationships and trust, right? Our partners have been together and they've been through a lot together over a bunch of years, right? And we went through a process of developing our Solidarity platform that took 9 months, 21 drafts, a little agonizing. These are the joys of coalition work, right? And yet, that's important. That's how you get ownership. That's how you build trust. And that's how, at the end of the day, you get a platform that everyone can agree to. I think the Green New Deal moved very fast, maybe a little too fast. But the point I'm making is that there are a set of unifying policies here that both meet our climate crisis and our crisis of economic inequality in this country, and that's the sweet spot. That if you frame it that way, if you pull that together, that's where you're going to get unity between labor unions and environmental organizations.
Obviously, you're head of the BlueGreen Alliance, not the United Steelworkers Union or the AFL-CIO, but I'm wondering what is in a green stimulus plan like the Green New Deal? What's in it for these unions? Why should they support this?
Because we need to, both in terms of recovering economically as a country, but also addressing some of our most pressing needs, we need to completely rebuild this country's infrastructure. And in doing that, we need to make it more sustainable and cleaner. And we also need to revitalize and reboot the American manufacturing base to both make all of the products and technologies that the rest of the world is demanding, that are clean technologies and clean energy technologies, and also to make all products cleaner. We make a lot of cement and a lot of steel. We actually make it cleaner than countries like China. And we need to do a still better job of making that in a low carbon to zero carbon way. It's not going to be something that we can do overnight, but it's achievable, and we've got some time to do it, and we need to make a set of capital investments in manufacturers so that they can retool to actually do that. If they do, we have the opportunity to put American manufacturers really in the pole position in what we consider to be probably the most important economic development race of this century, which is who captures market share in the clean energy economy, both on the infrastructure front and the manufacturing front, which of course are very interrelated. We are talking about hundreds of thousands, even millions of jobs. And so we can't just say that's going to create a lot of jobs. We got to make those good jobs. We prefer union jobs, but we got to, first and foremost, got to make them good jobs. But that's an enormous amount of work at a time when over 40 million Americans have filed for unemployment. It also offers a chance for us to restart and revitalize an economy that has been badly damaged by the COVID crisis.
So just because you've brought this up, and we were talking about this last night at home, honestly, my husband works in manufacturing, and, in terms of clean energy jobs, a report came out in Pennsylvania recently saying clean energy job sector in our state grew 8.7%, about 7,800 jobs between 2017 and 2019, compared with the average job growth of 1.9%. And when you look at coal, natural gas, and nuclear, those actually saw job losses in that same time period. And yet, there is this issue out there of, well, I work in coal, I'm not going to get a solar job. And the secondary issue is, and the reason I brought up us talking from home is my husband said, no new jobs are going to be union jobs. No, I don't know if that's correct, but I'm saying that's a general thought out there.
Look, we do need to acknowledge that probably the main reason so few jobs in new renewable energy sectors are union is that it is very difficult for workers to organize into unions to assert their power and collectively bargain with their employers. We have a set of labor laws in this country that is fundamentally tilted against workers and in favor of employers. That is why it is absolutely essential that we change labor law writ large across the economy, right? And the House took a very important step in that direction by passing something called the PRO Act earlier this year, which would strengthen the National Labor Relations Act in pretty fundamental ways. So this issue is not just confined to new clean energy sectors. It is an issue across our economy. And the decline in union density that has accompanied the tilting of labor law against unions has also been one of the primary drivers of increasing income inequality in this country, which at this point is as high as it's ever been as long as we have measured those numbers, right? And I would argue it is a driving factor in the hollowing out of our middle class, which also which has political consequences as well as economic consequences. Manufacturing, let's talk about that a little bit more. I mean, we have been losing manufacturing jobs for decades now. And so the point we are making, the argument we're making is that we have a pretty clear understanding of the direction in which the global economy is going. It is going in a low carbon direction, right? And irregardless of the actions or inaction of the Trump administration, that's where the shift is happening. At this point, we are the only country that is saying we're not going to participate in the Paris Agreement. That will change, of course, if Joe Biden becomes elected president. 40 countries, to give an example, already have a carbon price, right? So if we know that low carbon technologies and products are going to be demanded by global markets, we have an opportunity to actually be smart and strategic about preparing U.S. manufacturers to capture those markets and sell products to them. We've got some of the most innovative and most efficient manufacturers in the world, but many of them work on very tight margins in a manufacturing sector that is global and very trade exposed, right? So they got to keep their prices low. So we have to deal with that reality while also building up the capacity of U.S. manufacturing to respond to this demand. I think what's important and what BGA really focuses on is that we need to approach the issue of climate change in a holistic way. And in order to confront it, what we really need to be engaging in more broadly is economic policy and even industrial policy. And that raises a whole set of issues around equity and inclusiveness and fairness and job quality. And that's the fight and that's the conversation that we need to be having. And we're going to be in the middle of it.
Jason Walsh is Executive Director of the Green-Blue Alliance. Thanks for listening to Trump on Earth. If you like our show, please consider supporting us through Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/TrumpOnEarth. You can find us online at trumponearth.org or anywhere you get your podcasts. Write us a review and tell your friends. The podcast is supported by the Robert F. Schuman Foundation. Our producer and digital editor is Andy Cubis. Kathy Nauer is the executive producer. I'm Julie Grant.